Last Tuesday night, as I lay in our shared bed listening to Jake whisper another woman's name for the third time that week, I made a decision that would shatter everything I thought I knew about the man I'd been planning to marry. When I finally worked up the courage to Google that name, what I discovered didn't just break my heart. It revealed a web of lies so elaborate that our entire 3-year relationship had been nothing but a carefully constructed facade. What I did next at the charity gala we were hosting together made sure that everyone in Austin's financial district would know exactly who Jake Thompson really was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Rachel Martinez who fell in love with Jake Thompson 3 years ago was a woman who believed in the power of partnership, in building something meaningful with someone who shared your values and dreams. I was 29 then, a marketing manager at Sterling Creative Agency in downtown Austin, passionate about helping tech startups tell their stories and connect with their audiences. My apartment in South Austin was small, but perfectly curated, filled with plants I somehow managed to keep alive, and artwork from local artists whose careers I'd helped launch through strategic campaigns. I met Jake at a networking event during South by Southwest, one of those perfectly Austin moments where business and creativity collided over craft cocktails and live music. He was presenting a workshop on financial planning for creative professionals, and I was immediately drawn to his combination of sharp business acumen and genuine interest in helping artists achieve financial stability. Where most financial advisors saw creative types as risky investments, Jake saw potential. He understood that irregular income didn't mean unreliable people, and his approach to financial planning acknowledged the unique challenges facing Austin's vibrant creative community. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours. We talked about everything from the gentrification of East Austin to the best breakfast tacos in town, but what struck me most was how Jake listened. Really listened. When I mentioned my frustration with clients who wanted viral marketing campaigns but refused to invest in authentic storytelling, he didn't just nod politely. He asked follow-up questions that showed he understood the deeper challenges of my work. When I described my dream of eventually starting my own boutique agency specializing in socially conscious brands, his eyes lit up with genuine excitement, rather than the polite disinterest I'd grown accustomed to from men who viewed my career ambitions as cute hobbies. Jake Thompson at 32 was everything I'd been looking for in a partner. He ran his own financial planning firm, Thompson Advisory Services, from a sleek office in the downtown district. His client base included everyone from successful musicians and artists to tech entrepreneurs and established local business owners. He drove a sensible but stylish Honda Accord, lived in a beautifully renovated bungalow in Cedar Park, and somehow managed to balance professional success with genuine community involvement. He volunteered with financial literacy programs, donated his time to help small nonprofits with their budgeting, and was known throughout Austin's professional circles as someone you could trust with both your money and your secrets. What I loved most about Jake was his authenticity. In a city full of people trying to brand themselves, he seemed refreshingly genuine. His social media presence was minimal and professional. His conversations were substantive rather than performative. When he told stories about his clients' successes, he focused on their achievements rather than his own role in their financial growth. He treated service workers with respect, remembered details about mutual friends' lives, and never made me feel like I was competing with his work for his attention. Our relationship developed with the kind of organic ease that made me believe in soulmates again. We discovered a shared love of hiking the trails around Austin, spent Sunday mornings exploring different neighborhoods and their local coffee shops, and developed a tradition of cooking elaborate meals together while listening to music from artists we'd discovered at local venues. Jake introduced me to financial planning concepts that helped me organize my irregular freelance income alongside my salary. I helped him understand social media marketing strategies that attracted younger clients to his traditionally older skewing industry. By our 6-month anniversary, we were already talking about long-term plans, not in the desperate way of people trying to force compatibility, but in the natural way of two people whose life goals genuinely aligned. We both wanted to build something meaningful in Austin, to contribute to the community that had given us so much. We shared values around work-life balance, around supporting local businesses, around creating financial security, without sacrificing the creativity and authenticity that made life worth living. Jake's family welcomed me immediately and completely. His parents, Mark and Linda Thompson, were the kind of warm, generous people who made you understand where Jake's character came from. Mark owned a successful construction company that specialized in sustainable building practices, and Linda was a retired teacher who now volunteered with adult literacy programs. They treated me like a daughter from our first meeting, including me in family traditions, and asking for my input on everything from vacation planning to gift ideas for Jake's younger brother, Tyler. Tyler Thompson was 28, a graphic designer who worked for a local marketing firm and spent his weekends creating murals around East Austin. He was Jake's opposite in many ways, more artistic and spontaneous, where Jake was methodical and planned, but their bond was unbreakable. Jake had helped Tyler navigate the financial challenges of freelance creative work, and Tyler had introduced Jake to the artistic side of Austin that had enriched his life immeasurably. Watching them together made me excited about the family I was potentially joining. The Thompson family dynamic was everything I'd missed growing up as an only child. Sunday dinners at Mark and Linda's house in Westlake became a weekly tradition. Linda would cook elaborate meals while Mark grilled whatever vegetables were in season, and Tyler would usually bring whatever girlfriend he was dating, along with stories about his latest artistic projects. Jake would help with financial advice or business strategy, and I'd contribute marketing insights or help with social media presence. It felt like the kind of supportive, interconnected family I'd always dreamed of being part of. When Jake and I moved in together after 18 months of dating, it felt like the natural next step rather than a leap of faith. His bungalow in Cedar Park was perfect for two people building careers while maintaining some connection to Austin's creative community. We converted the spare bedroom into a shared office space where Jake could meet with clients who preferred home consultations, and I could work on freelance projects that required more focus than my agency's open office environment provided. We developed routines that felt sustainable and supportive rather than restrictive. Our morning routine became sacred. Jake would wake up first and start coffee while I showered. Then we'd switch places while he got ready for his day. We'd eat breakfast together on the back patio when weather permitted, discussing our schedules and any evening plans. Jake's work required more traditional business hours, but he was flexible enough to accommodate evening networking events or weekend client meetings when necessary. My agency work was more predictable, but I often had freelance projects that required evening or weekend attention. We learned to coordinate our schedules in ways that maximized both our productivity and our time together. Evenings were for cooking, walking around the neighborhood, or exploring whatever cultural. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Events Austin offered. We weren't the type of couple who needed constant entertainment, but we also weren't homebodies who avoided social connections. We found a balance that felt right for both of us, attending networking events together when appropriate, maintaining separate friendships when necessary, and creating space for the kind of quiet domestic intimacy that builds strong foundations for long-term partnerships. Jake's approach to financial planning influenced how we structured our life together in ways that felt collaborative rather than controlling. We maintained separate bank accounts for our individual expenses and career investments, but opened a joint savings account for shared goals like vacations, home improvements, and the eventual engagement ring we'd started discussing casually but seriously. Jake never made me feel judged for my spending patterns, and I never felt like he was trying to manage my financial decisions. Instead, he helped me understand investment strategies and long-term planning concepts that made me feel more confident about my financial future. The engagement ring conversation started about 6 months after we moved in together, not because either of us felt pressured by timeline expectations, but because our relationship had reached a level of commitment and compatibility that made marriage feel like an exciting next step rather than a social obligation. We talked about children, about career goals, about where we wanted to live long-term, about how we'd handle the inevitable challenges that all couples face. Jake's approach to these conversations was thoughtful and thorough, without being overwhelming or controlling. We'd looked at rings together, not because Jake needed my input on style preferences, but because we both believed engagement should be a mutual decision, rather than a surprise proposal that put pressure on the recipient to respond positively regardless of their actual feelings. I'd fallen in love with a vintage-inspired setting from a local jeweler who specialized in ethically sourced stones and custom designs. Jake had noted my preferences and started working with the jeweler to create something that honored my taste while adding personal touches that would make the ring uniquely ours. Our 3-year anniversary was approaching, and Jake had been dropping hints about planning something special. Not obvious hints that would spoil a surprise, but the kind of subtle communications that happen between people who know each other well enough to read between the lines. He'd been working longer hours lately, which I'd attributed to the natural busy season for financial planning that coincided with people making New Year's resolutions about their money management. He'd also been slightly more secretive about his phone and computer, but in ways that seemed more like someone planning a surprise than someone hiding something inappropriate. The Jake I'd fallen in love with was incapable of deception in the ways that mattered. He was honest about his work stress, about family dynamics, about his own limitations and areas for growth. When he was frustrated with difficult clients, he talked through the challenges rather than bringing negative energy home without explanation. When family obligations conflicted with our plans, he communicated about scheduling needs rather than making unilateral decisions. When our relationship hit the normal rough patches that all couples experience, he approached problem-solving with openness and genuine interest in finding solutions that worked for both of us. This was the foundation of trust that made his nighttime whispers so completely shocking and devastating. For 3 years, Jake had been the most honest, transparent, communicative partner I'd ever had. His integrity was one of the qualities I loved most about him, and it was integral to both his professional success and our personal relationship. Financial advisors succeed based on trustworthiness, and Jake's reputation in Austin's business community was built on his reliability and ethical standards. Our social circle knew us as the couple who had their relationship figured out. We were the ones friends came to for advice about communication strategies or conflict resolution. We were invited to parties as a unit because people enjoyed our dynamic and trusted that we'd contribute positively to group settings. When mutual friends got engaged, they asked us for recommendations about vendors and planning strategies. When colleagues needed relationship advice, they sought out perspectives from both of us because they respected how we navigated challenges together. Amy Rodriguez had been my best friend since college, and she'd watched my relationship with Jake develop from the very beginning. As a social worker specializing in family therapy, Amy had professional insights into relationship dynamics that made her observations particularly valuable. She'd been initially skeptical of Jake, not because of anything specific about him, but because she'd seen me make poor choices in previous relationships and wanted to ensure I was approaching this partnership with realistic expectations rather than romantic idealization. But Amy's skepticism had evolved into genuine appreciation for Jake's character and our compatibility. She'd watched him support my career ambitions without trying to manage or control my decisions. She'd observed how he handled conflict and stress without taking frustration out on me inappropriately. She'd seen him integrate seamlessly into my existing friendships without trying to monopolize my time or create drama with people who'd been important to me before he entered my life. By our 2nd anniversary, Amy was telling mutual friends that Jake was the best partner I'd ever had, and that she'd never seen me happier or more confident in a relationship. This was the context that made the whispered name so alarming and confusing. The Jake I knew didn't have secrets that involved other women. He didn't maintain relationships that he felt the need to hide from me. His phone was usually face up on counters and tables, and he answered texts and calls in my presence without any apparent discomfort. His social media interactions were professional and appropriate. His female clients were people whose relationships with Jake I understood and felt comfortable with. His female friends were either mutual friends or people whose connections to Jake predated our relationship and had been transparently integrated into our social circle. The first time I heard him whisper Melissa in his sleep, I convinced myself it was probably nothing significant. People dream about random individuals from their past, about coworkers, about characters from movies or books they'd consumed recently. Sleep talking doesn't necessarily reflect conscious thoughts or feelings, and Jake had never given me any reason to feel suspicious about his fidelity or honesty. I made a mental note of the name, but didn't allow myself to spiral into paranoid speculation about its significance. The second time, 3 nights later, I paid more attention. He whispered Melissa twice, with what sounded like genuine affection and longing. The tone was intimate in a way that made my stomach clench with anxiety. I tried to rationalize away. Jake talked in his sleep occasionally, usually nonsensical fragments related to work stress or random daily experiences. But this was different. This sounded like someone calling out to a person they cared about deeply. The third time, just 4 nights after the second incident, I knew I couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. Jake whispered Melissa 3 times over the course of about 20 minutes, and each repetition sounded more urgent and emotional than the last. He also whispered what sounded like, "I miss you," and something that might have been, "I'm sorry," though the words were muffled enough that I couldn't be completely certain. Lying in our bed, listening to the man I was planning to marry whisper another woman's name with obvious longing, I felt my entire world shift in ways I couldn't have anticipated. This wasn't just about potential infidelity, though that possibility was devastating enough. This was about the realization that Jake might be capable of deception so sophisticated that I'd been completely fooled for 3 years. This was about questioning my own judgment and intuition in ways that threatened my confidence in every aspect of my life. I started paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked or dismissed as normal variations in Jake's behavior and routine. The slightly longer work hours I'd attributed to seasonal business patterns. The increased focus on his phone that I'd assumed was related to client communications or surprise planning. The subtle changes in our physical intimacy that I'd chalked up to the natural evolution of long-term relationships. When viewed through the lens of potential deception, these patterns took on more sinister implications. But I also recognized that paranoia could be as destructive to relationships as actual betrayal. I'd seen friends destroy perfectly healthy partnerships by allowing insecurity and overthinking to create problems where none existed. I'd watched people interpret innocent interactions as evidence of infidelity and turn their relationships into constant investigations that eroded trust and intimacy. I didn't want to become that person, but I also couldn't pretend that hearing Jake whisper another woman's name with obvious emotion was something I could simply ignore. The name Melissa itself was generic enough that it could refer to anyone from Jake's past or present. A college classmate, a former coworker, a client, a distant family connection, a character from something he'd been reading or watching. Without additional context, the name alone wasn't evidence of anything inappropriate. But combined with the tone of longing and the repeated occurrences, it suggested an emotional connection that Jake had never mentioned to me. During our 3 years together, Jake had been open about his romantic history. He'd told me about his college girlfriend who'd moved to New York for graduate school, about a few serious relationships during his 20s, about dating experiences that had helped him understand what he wanted in a long-term partner. He'd mentioned female friends from college and professional connections that were important to him. He'd been transparent about female clients whose relationships with him were strictly professional, but involved regular communication about personal financial matters. None of these women were named Melissa. At least, not any Melissa that Jake had ever mentioned to me in 3 years of increasingly intimate conversations about his past, his work, his social connections, and his family relationships. If Melissa was someone significant enough to appear in his dreams with obvious emotional weight, why had he never mentioned her existence? I spent the days following the third whispered incident, analyzing our recent conversations for any mention of a Melissa, or any references that might provide context for understanding who this person could be. I reviewed social media interactions, both Jake's posts and his engagement with others' content, looking for any evidence of connections to women named Melissa. I mentally cataloged his recent work meetings and client interactions, trying to remember if he'd mentioned working with anyone by that name. The absence of any reference to Melissa in Jake's conscious communications made her presence in his sleep-talking even more mysterious and concerning. If she was a current client or colleague, why wouldn't he have mentioned her in the context of work discussions? If she was someone from his past who'd recently reconnected with him, why wouldn't that have come up in conversation the way other renewed friendships had? If she was a family connection or a friend's girlfriend, Why hadn't she been mentioned during discussions about social plans or family events? The only explanation that made sense was that Melissa was someone Jake felt the need to keep secret from me. And the only reasons I could imagine for keeping someone secret were either professional confidentiality concerns that were more complex than usual client relationships, or personal connections that Jake believed would threaten our relationship if I knew about them. Professional confidentiality seemed unlikely given Jake's usual approach to discussing his work. He was careful about client privacy, but he'd always been able to talk about his professional challenges and successes without violating anyone's trust. He'd mentioned working with difficult clients, celebrating clients' financial achievements, and navigating complex family financial situations without ever making me feel like he was sharing inappropriate details about specific individuals, which left personal connections that Jake felt were too threatening to our relationship to discuss openly. The most obvious possibility was that Melissa was someone he'd been involved with romantically, either recently or in the past, in ways that created ongoing emotional complications. Someone he still had feelings for, someone who still had feelings for him, or someone whose presence in his life created temptations or conflicts that he didn't want me to know about. But even this possibility seemed inconsistent with the Jake I knew. He'd been honest about finding other women attractive, about occasional moments of temptation that were normal in long-term relationships, about his own areas of vulnerability when it came to maintaining appropriate boundaries. He'd never given me reason to believe he was capable of maintaining significant emotional or physical relationships outside our partnership. The mystery of Melissa consumed my thoughts in ways that started affecting my work performance and daily functioning. I found myself distracted during client meetings, analyzing every interaction for potential insights into Jake's secret connections. I scrolled through his social media obsessively, looking for comments or interactions I might have previously overlooked. I started paying hypervigilant attention to his phone calls and text messages, trying to gather evidence about his communications without directly violating his privacy. This level of surveillance felt foreign and uncomfortable. I'd never been a jealous or suspicious partner, and I didn't like the person I was becoming in response to my anxiety about Melissa's identity and significance. But I also couldn't return to the blissful ignorance I'd enjoyed before hearing Jake whisper her name with such obvious emotional weight. The tension between my desire to trust Jake and my need to understand what was happening created a constant state of internal conflict that was exhausting and unsustainable. I needed answers, but I also needed those answers to come from a place of honest communication rather than secret investigation. I decided that the healthiest approach would be to talk to Jake directly about what I'd heard and give him the opportunity to explain who Melissa was and why he'd been dreaming about her. But I also recognized that if Jake was capable of maintaining significant secrets, he was probably also capable of lying convincingly when confronted directly. I needed to approach the conversation strategically, in ways that would encourage honesty while also protecting myself from being manipulated if Jake was indeed hiding something serious about his relationship with this mysterious Melissa. The foundation of trust we'd built over 3 years was about to be tested in ways I'd never imagined, and I had no idea whether our relationship would survive the answers I was about to demand. The next morning, I woke up before Jake's alarm and lay still, watching him sleep peacefully beside me. In the early morning light filtering through our bedroom curtains, he looked like the same man I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. His face was relaxed, free from the subtle tension I'd started noticing during his waking hours. There was no hint of the emotional turmoil that had led him to whisper another woman's name with such longing just hours before. I slipped out of bed quietly and went to the kitchen to start our usual morning routine, but my movements felt mechanical and strange. Making coffee, setting out breakfast items, checking my phone for overnight work messages. Everything felt like I was performing a role in a play I no longer understood. The domestic intimacy that had felt so natural and comforting for the past 18 months now seemed fragile and potentially false. Jake appeared in the kitchen 20 minutes later, looking refreshed and cheerful. He kissed my forehead and squeezed my shoulder, the same casual affection he'd shown every morning for months. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, pouring himself coffee and settling into his usual chair at our small dining table. "How did you sleep?" The question felt loaded with irony I couldn't share. "Fine," I said, forcing normalcy into my voice. "How about you? Any interesting dreams?" I watched his face carefully for any reaction that might provide insight into his nighttime whispers. Jake's expression remained perfectly neutral. "Not that I remember," he said, scrolling through emails on his phone. "You know how it is? I usually don't recall my dreams unless they're particularly weird or stressful." He looked up at me with genuine warmth. "Why, did I keep you awake with sleep talking again? I know I've been doing that more lately." The fact that he acknowledged his sleep talking felt significant, but his casual dismissal of its content frustrated me. "Just occasional mumbling," I said carefully. Nothing coherent. I was testing whether he'd admit to saying anything specific, whether he was aware of whispering Melissa's name. "Work stress, probably," Jake said, returning his attention to his phone. "I've been dealing with some complicated client situations lately, and they're probably bleeding into my subconscious." He paused, looking thoughtful. "Actually, I should probably mention that I'll be working late a few nights this week. There's a situation that requires some evening meetings and additional research." This was the first time in months that Jake had mentioned needing extended work hours, without providing specific details about the client or project involved. Usually he was forthcoming about his schedule challenges, often asking for my input on time management strategies, or using our dinner conversations to work through complex client situations. "Anything I can help with?" I asked, curious about his reluctance to elaborate. "You know I'm good at research and problem solving, and my marketing background sometimes provides useful perspectives on client relations." Jake's hesitation was brief but noticeable. "It's more of a specialized financial situation," he said finally. "Probably not something where outside perspectives would be helpful, but I appreciate the offer." He finished his coffee and stood up, gathering his briefcase and keys. "I should probably head out a few minutes early today to prepare for my first meeting." This departure from routine felt significant. Jake usually lingered over breakfast, using our morning conversations to mentally prepare for his day and connect with me before we both entered our separate professional worlds. His eagerness to leave suggested either increased work pressure or discomfort with our interaction. After Jake left, I sat at our dining table feeling unsettled by the conversation. His explanation for the sleep talking was reasonable, but something about his demeanor felt slightly off. The casual acknowledgement of sleep talking combined with immediate deflection to work stress felt like someone providing plausible explanations without addressing the actual content of what he'd been saying. I decided to approach the mystery systematically, using the same analytical skills that made me effective in marketing strategy. I needed information about who Melissa might be, when Jake might have encountered her, and what kind of relationship could create the emotional intensity I'd heard in his nighttime whispers. My first step was reviewing Jake's social media presence more thoroughly than I'd ever done during our relationship. I'd always respected his privacy and trusted his character, so I'd never felt the need to monitor his online interactions. But the mysterious Melissa had changed my comfort level with casual trust. Jake's Facebook profile was professionally maintained and relatively inactive. His posts were infrequent and focused on business achievements, local Austin events, and occasional photos of us together at social gatherings. His friend list included clients, colleagues, family members, and mutual friends, but scrolling through hundreds of connections, I found no one named Melissa. His Instagram account was even more minimal, mostly featuring photos of Austin landscapes, food from restaurants we'd visited together, and professional content related to financial planning. His follower list was smaller and more carefully curated, but again, no obvious Melissa connections. LinkedIn was more promising for professional insights. Jake's network included hundreds of connections from his educational background, previous employment, current client relationships, and industry associations. The platform's search function allowed me to filter his connections by name, and I immediately searched for anyone named Melissa. The results were limited but interesting. There were 2 professional connections named Melissa Chen, who worked for a tech startup in downtown Austin, and Melissa Rodriguez, who was listed as a marketing coordinator for a financial services company in San Antonio. Neither profile indicated obvious personal connections to Jake, but both were in industries where professional relationships could develop into more complex interactions. Melissa Chen's profile was particularly intriguing. She worked for Growth Tech Solutions, a startup that specialized in financial technology for small businesses. Her background included a finance degree from UT Austin and previous experience with several Austin-based companies. Her profile photo showed an attractive woman in her late 20s with a professional demeanor and bright smile. The timing of Jake's connection to Melissa Chen was revealing. According to LinkedIn, they'd connected 8 months ago, which coincided with when Jake had started working longer hours and mentioned expanding his client base to include more tech industry professionals. If Melissa was a professional connection that had developed into something more personal, the timeline would align with subtle changes I'd noticed in Jake's behavior over the past several months. Melissa Rodriguez seemed less likely given her location in San Antonio and her employment with a competing financial services company. However, her background included several Austin connections, suggesting she might have personal or professional reasons to travel to our city regularly. My investigation into Jake's professional life revealed how little I actually knew about his day-to-day client interactions and business development activities. While he shared general information about his work challenges and successes, I realized I had limited knowledge about specific individuals he worked with or the detailed nature of his professional relationships. This knowledge gap felt significant, given my growing suspicions about Melissa's identity. If Jake was developing inappropriate relationships with clients or colleagues, I would have no way of detecting those connections based on our usual conversations about work. I decided to expand my research beyond social media to include public records and business databases that might provide additional context about potential Melissa connections. Austin's business community was large but interconnected, and financial advisors like Jake often developed relationships that extended beyond simple client services into networking, partnership, and collaboration opportunities. The Travis County Business License Database allowed me to search for companies associated with either Melissa Chen or Melissa Rodriguez. Chen's startup was registered in Austin with several other principals listed, none of whom I recognized from Jake's professional network. Rodriguez's San Antonio company had no obvious Austin connections, but she was listed as a registered agent for a consulting firm that had been established just 3 months ago. Property records showed that Melissa Chen lived in a downtown Austin apartment complex that was popular with young professionals. Her address was less than 10 miles from Jake's office, making regular in-person meetings easily possible. Melissa Rodriguez's San Antonio address was over an hour's drive away, making casual interaction less likely unless there were specific business reasons for regular travel. Court records and civil filings revealed nothing relevant about either woman, suggesting that neither had been involved in legal disputes or business conflicts that might create complex professional relationships with financial advisors. My online investigation was providing useful background information, but I needed more immediate insights into Jake's recent behavior and communication patterns. I decided to pay closer attention to his phone and computer usage without directly violating his privacy or engaging in obviously inappropriate surveillance. That evening, Jake returned home later than usual, arriving at nearly 8 o'clock with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. "Sorry about the late dinner," he said, setting food containers on our kitchen counter. The client meeting ran much longer than expected, and I thought picking up food would be faster than trying to cook anything substantial. This explanation was reasonable, but Jake usually texted when his schedule changed significantly. My phone showed no messages about delayed meetings or dinner plan modifications. "No problem," I said, helping him unpack the food. "How did the meeting go?" "Complicated," Jake said, opening a beer and settling onto our living room couch. Some clients have situations that require more hand-holding than others. This particular case involves some family financial dynamics that are pretty messy. His description was vague in ways that felt deliberately uninformative. Usually, Jake provided enough detail about client challenges to help me understand his professional stress without violating confidentiality. This generic explanation suggested either highly sensitive information or reluctance to share details for other reasons. "Anything I can do to help you decompress?" I asked, sitting beside him and trying to read his body language for signs of stress or deception. Jake smiled and pulled me closer, but his affection felt slightly performative rather than spontaneous. "Just having dinner together is perfect," he said. "Tell me about your day." How's the campaign for that nonprofit coming along? His redirection to my work felt like an avoidance strategy, but I allowed the conversation to shift rather than pressing for more information about his mysterious client situation. I needed to gather more evidence before confronting him directly about my suspicions. Over the next few days, I maintained heightened awareness of Jake's communication patterns and schedule variations. He received more text messages than usual, often stepping into other rooms to respond rather than handling them casually in my presence. His phone remained face down more frequently, and he seemed more protective of his screen when receiving notifications. These changes were subtle enough that they could be attributed to increased work demands or client confidentiality requirements. Financial advisors often dealt with sensitive personal information that required discretion even within their own households. But combined with the nighttime whispers of Melissa's name, these behavioral modifications suggested something more personal than professional discretion. I also noticed changes in our physical intimacy that made me question whether Jake's attention was being directed elsewhere. Our sexual connection had always been strong and consistent, but recently he seemed distracted during intimate moments, as if his mind was occupied with thoughts or feelings he couldn't share with me. These observations created a constant state of anxiety that affected my own work performance and emotional stability. I found myself analyzing every interaction for hidden meanings, second-guessing conversations that previously would have felt natural and honest. The foundation of trust that had made our relationship feel secure was being eroded by growing evidence that Jake was maintaining significant secrets. Amy Rodriguez noticed my distraction during our weekly coffee meetup at Radio Coffee on Barton Springs Road. We'd been meeting every Wednesday morning for over 2 years, using the time to catch up on personal and professional developments while supporting each other through whatever challenges we were facing. "You seem preoccupied lately," Amy observed, stirring her cortado and studying my face with the professional insight that made her an effective therapist. "Everything okay with Jake and the engagement planning?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share about my growing suspicions. Amy had always been supportive of my relationship with Jake, but she was also protective of my emotional well-being and wouldn't hesitate to encourage me to address potential problems directly. "I've been wondering about some changes in his behavior," I said carefully. "Nothing dramatic, just subtle differences in his communication patterns and schedule. Probably just work stress, but it's been making me a little anxious." Amy's expression shifted to professional concern. "What kind of changes specifically? Are we talking about normal relationship evolution, or patterns that feel more concerning?" "He's been working later, being less specific about client situations and seeming more protective of his phone," I said. "Plus, he's been talking in his sleep more than usual, saying things that don't seem related to work stress." "Sleep talking about what?" Amy asked, leaning forward with increased attention. I took a deep breath, realizing that sharing this information would make my suspicions feel more real and urgent. "He's been whispering a woman's name, Melissa, multiple times over the past couple of weeks, with what sounds like genuine emotion." Amy's professional demeanor intensified. "Have you asked him about who Melissa is?" I tried indirectly, asking about his dreams and whether he remembered saying anything specific in his sleep. I said, "He claims not to remember dreaming and attributes the sleep talking to work stress." "But you don't believe that explanation," Amy said, making it a statement rather than a question. "I want to believe it," I said honestly, "but I've never known Jake to be secretive about his professional relationships, and the emotional tone when he says her name doesn't sound like someone he's dreaming about because of work stress." Amy was quiet for several moments, processing the information with her therapeutic training and personal knowledge of my relationship history. "Have you done any research into who Melissa might be?" "Some," I admitted. "I found a couple of professional connections on LinkedIn, but nothing that clearly explains why Jake would be dreaming about someone named Melissa with obvious emotional attachment." "Rachel," Amy said gently, "I know this is hard to consider, but you need to trust your instincts about this situation. If Jake is maintaining a relationship that he feels the need to keep secret from you, that's a serious problem, regardless of whether it's crossed physical or emotional boundaries." Her validation of my concerns was both reassuring and terrifying. "I keep hoping there's an innocent explanation," I said. "Maybe Melissa is a client with complicated family dynamics, or someone from his past who's been on his mind for professional reasons." Maybe, Amy agreed. But after 3 years together, Jake should be able to discuss professional challenges openly with you, even if he needs to protect client confidentiality. And dreams that involve emotional calling out to specific individuals usually indicate deeper psychological connections than work relationships typically create. We spent the rest of our coffee meeting discussing strategies for addressing my concerns directly with Jake. Amy encouraged me to approach the conversation from a place of seeking understanding rather than making accusations. But she also emphasized the importance of trusting my instincts if Jake's explanations didn't feel genuine or complete. That afternoon, I made a decision that felt both necessary and invasive. I needed more concrete information about Jake's recent activities and communications, particularly anything related to Melissa Chen or other women who might be involved in his professional or personal life. Jake's home office was in our converted spare bedroom, and while I respected his need for privacy during client meetings, I'd never felt restricted from entering the space for household tasks or casual conversations. The room contained his desktop computer, filing cabinets with client documents, and various business-related materials that he kept organized and secure. I waited until Jake left for an afternoon client meeting, then entered his office with the specific goal of looking for any evidence of communications or relationships that he hadn't discussed with me. I felt guilty about violating his privacy, but my need for answers outweighed my discomfort with snooping. Jake's desktop computer was password protected, but I knew his usual password combinations from watching him log into various accounts over the years. His system wasn't designed to keep me out, since he'd never had reason to hide his digital activities from me. His email account revealed immediately suspicious patterns. Jake maintained separate folders for different types of client communications, and most of his professional correspondence was well organized and easily categorized. But there was a folder labeled Projects that contained emails I'd never seen him reference in our conversations about his work. The Projects folder contained over 30 emails exchanged with Melissa Chen over the past 8 months. The early messages were clearly professional, focused on financial planning services for her startup and strategic advice about managing irregular income as an entrepreneur. But the tone and content evolved significantly over time. By the 4th month of correspondence, Jake and Melissa were discussing personal topics alongside business matters. She shared information about her dating life and career frustrations. He offered advice that extended beyond financial planning into relationship counseling and emotional support. Their emails became longer and more frequent, sometimes including multiple exchanges per day. The most recent messages were unmistakably inappropriate for a professional relationship. Melissa wrote about missing their conversations when business demands prevented regular communication. Jake responded with reassurances about the importance of their connection and hints about wanting to spend more time together outside of professional contexts. One email from 3 weeks ago made my stomach clench with recognition and dread. "I know our situation is complicated," Melissa had written, "but I can't stop thinking about our conversation yesterday. I've never felt so understood by someone, especially someone who's supposed to be helping me with financial planning, rather than making me question everything about what I want in a relationship." Jake's response was carefully worded but emotionally loaded. "I understand completely," he'd written. "Our connection has evolved beyond what either of us expected, and I find myself looking forward to our meetings for reasons that have nothing to do with business strategy. I know we need to be careful about boundaries, but I also can't ignore how much our friendship means to me." Reading Jake's words felt like discovering evidence of a completely different person than the man I'd been planning to marry. The tone, the emotional intimacy, the obvious investment in a relationship he'd never mentioned to me, everything contradicted the honesty and transparency I'd believed defined our partnership. But the emails also revealed that Jake hadn't crossed obvious physical boundaries with Melissa. Their relationship appeared to be emotional rather than sexual, but the level of intimacy and mutual attraction was undeniable. Jake was developing feelings for another woman while living with me and planning our engagement. I continued reading through their correspondence, documenting the evolution of their relationship, and trying to understand how Jake had rationalized maintaining such an intimate connection while keeping it completely secret from me. The emails revealed regular coffee meetings, lunch appointments that extended far beyond normal client interactions, and evening phone calls that Jake had never mentioned during our conversations about his work schedule. Melissa's messages indicated that she was aware Jake was in a serious relationship, But Jake had apparently minimized the significance of our partnership and suggested that he was questioning his long-term commitment to me. In one particularly devastating email, he'd written, "Rachel and I have a comfortable relationship, but comfort isn't the same as passion. Our connection has helped me realize that I might be settling for stability rather than pursuing what could be a more fulfilling partnership." The characterization of our relationship as merely comfortable felt like a betrayal as significant as his emotional affair with Melissa. Jake had reduced 3 years of what I'd believed was genuine love and partnership to a convenient arrangement he was apparently outgrowing. I photographed several of the most revealing emails with my phone, creating evidence that could support whatever decisions I needed to make about confronting Jake or ending our relationship. The documentation felt necessary, given Jake's demonstrated ability to maintain elaborate deceptions while appearing completely honest and trustworthy. The discovery of Jake's email correspondence with Melissa answered my questions about who he'd been dreaming about, but it raised even more disturbing questions about his character and our relationship's foundation. If Jake was capable of developing such an intimate emotional connection while living with me daily, what other aspects of his behavior and feelings had he been hiding successfully? I left his office feeling like I'd discovered evidence of a completely different person sharing my home and my bed. The Jake who wrote romantic emails to another woman while planning engagement surprises for me was a stranger whose motivations and feelings I couldn't understand or predict. That evening, Jake returned home with flowers and wine, suggesting we celebrate the approaching weekend with a special dinner and movie night at home. His romantic gesture felt like a cruel irony given what I'd learned about his relationship with Melissa Chen. "What's the special occasion?" I asked, accepting the flowers while trying to maintain normal behavior despite my internal turmoil. "No special occasion," Jake said, kissing my cheek and opening the wine. "I just realized we haven't had a quiet evening together in weeks, and I wanted to make sure you know how much I appreciate you, especially when work gets demanding and I'm not the most attentive partner." His words about appreciation and attention felt like manipulation designed to assuage guilt rather than genuine expressions of love. Knowing about his emails with Melissa made every romantic gesture feel calculating and false. We spent the evening watching a movie and talking about weekend plans, but I felt like I was performing a role in a play while processing devastating information about the real story happening behind the scenes. Jake seemed relaxed and affectionate, showing no signs of internal conflict about his double life or guilt about his emotional affair. That night, I lay awake listening for any sleep-talking that might provide additional insights into Jake's feelings about Melissa or his plans for their relationship. He whispered her name twice, but more softly than previous nights, and I couldn't make out any additional words that might reveal his intentions or emotional state. The next morning brought another late departure for work and vague explanations about client meetings that required extended hours. Jake's behavior had become predictable in its evasiveness, and I realized that confronting him directly about Melissa would likely result in more sophisticated lies rather than honest admissions about his feelings and intentions. I needed a different strategy for addressing Jake's betrayal, something that would force accountability rather than providing him with opportunities to manipulate the situation further. The man who could maintain such an elaborate emotional affair while appearing completely committed to our relationship was clearly capable of deception that went far beyond anything I'd previously imagined possible. My discovery of Jake's emails had transformed my understanding of our relationship and his character, but it had also given me power that he didn't know I possessed. The question was how to use that power to protect myself, while ensuring that Jake faced appropriate consequences for his betrayal of my trust and our partnership. Armed with concrete evidence of Jake's emotional affair, I found myself in the strange position of knowing more about my boyfriend's true feelings than he realized. The emails I discovered revealed not just his inappropriate relationship with Melissa Chen, but also his fundamental dishonesty about our partnership and his plans for our future together. Every conversation we'd had about engagement rings and wedding plans now felt like elaborate theater designed to keep me compliant, while he explored his options with another woman. The most disturbing aspect of my discovery wasn't just Jake's betrayal, but the sophisticated level of compartmentalization he'd achieved. He could write romantic emails to Melissa during his lunch break, then come home and discuss weekend plans with me as if nothing had changed. He could whisper her name in his sleep while lying next to me, then wake up and kiss my forehead with apparent affection. The man I'd been living with for 18 months was capable of deception so complete that I'd had no idea another woman occupied such significant space in his thoughts and emotions. I spent the weekend analyzing every interaction with Jake through the lens of my new knowledge about his double life. His recent suggestions about taking a weekend trip to San Antonio suddenly seemed potentially connected to visiting Melissa, who worked there but had Austin connections. His mentions of expanding his client base in the tech industry took on new meaning when I realized one of those clients had become his emotional confidant and potential replacement for me. The timing of Jake's behavioral changes aligned perfectly with the evolution of his relationship with Melissa. The increased work hours had started 8 months ago when their email correspondence began. The phone protectiveness had intensified 4 months ago when their communications became more personal. The subtle changes in our physical intimacy corresponded with the period when Melissa had started expressing romantic feelings for him in their messages. What made Jake's deception even more painful was recognizing how he'd used my own character traits against me. He knew I was trusting and supportive of his career ambitions. He knew I respected his need for client confidentiality and wouldn't pry into his professional relationships. He knew I valued independence in relationships and wouldn't demand constant access to his communications or detailed accounts of his daily activities. He'd exploited every quality that made me a good partner to create space for developing an inappropriate relationship with another woman. The revelation also forced me to reconsider every recent conversation about our future together. Jake's discussions about engagement rings and wedding planning now seemed like manipulation designed to prevent me from questioning his commitment, while he explored whether Melissa might be a better long-term partner. His romantic gestures and reassurances about our relationship felt like strategies for managing my potential suspicions rather than genuine expressions of love. But perhaps most devastatingly, I realized that Jake's feelings for Melissa were probably genuine in ways his feelings for me no longer were. The passion and excitement evident in his emails suggested he was experiencing the kind of intense romantic connection that we'd shared early in our relationship, but that had evolved into something more stable and predictable. If Jake was questioning whether comfort was enough, it meant he'd already decided that what we had together wasn't sufficient for his emotional needs. This realization forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about our relationship that existed independently of his betrayal. While I'd been completely satisfied with the partnership we'd built, Jake had apparently been feeling restless and unfulfilled in ways he'd never communicated to me. Instead of addressing those feelings honestly through conversation or couples counseling, he'd chosen to explore alternatives while maintaining the security and convenience of our established relationship. The emails revealed that Melissa was everything I wasn't. Where I was practical and strategic, she was spontaneous and emotionally expressive. Where I was supportive and accommodating, she was challenging and unpredictable. Where I was focused on building stability, she was pursuing adventure and passion. Jake's attraction to her represented not just infidelity, but a fundamental rejection of the type of person and partnership I represented. Understanding this dynamic helped me recognize that confronting Jake about his emotional affair wouldn't necessarily save our relationship. Even if he ended his inappropriate connection with Melissa, the underlying dissatisfaction that had led him to seek emotional intimacy elsewhere would remain unaddressed. He'd already demonstrated that he was capable of profound dishonesty when our relationship didn't meet his needs, and there was no reason to believe he wouldn't make similar choices in the future if he felt unfulfilled or tempted by other opportunities. These insights led me to a crucial decision about how to handle Jake's betrayal. Rather than trying to repair our relationship through confrontation and negotiation, I needed to focus on protecting myself and ensuring that Jake faced appropriate consequences for his deception. The man who could maintain such an elaborate double life while planning our engagement was not someone I could trust with my emotional or financial future, regardless of what promises he might make about ending his relationship with Melissa. My first priority became gathering additional evidence that would support whatever legal or financial decisions I needed to make about ending our partnership. While we weren't married, we had shared financial commitments and joint investments that would require documentation to resolve fairly. Jake's demonstrated dishonesty meant I couldn't trust him to be honest about our financial entanglements if I decided to end our relationship. I spent Monday morning reviewing our joint bank account statements and investment portfolios, documenting the specific contributions each of us had made to our shared financial goals. The engagement ring fund we'd been building together included equal monthly contributions from both of us, totaling nearly $8,000. Our vacation savings account had accumulated over $12,000 through systematic deposits over the past year. We'd also made joint investments in a retirement account that had grown to over $25,000. These shared financial commitments represented significant money that would need to be divided if our relationship ended. Given Jake's willingness to deceive me about fundamental aspects of his emotional life, I had no confidence that he would be honest about our financial arrangements during a breakup conversation. I needed documentation that would protect my interests regardless of how manipulative or deceptive he might become during the process of ending our partnership. I also began researching my legal rights regarding our shared living situation. While my name wasn't on the mortgage for Jake's house, I'd been contributing to household expenses and had made improvements to the property that might have legal implications. My contributions to our shared expenses and joint investments created financial entanglements that would require careful handling to ensure I didn't lose money I'd contributed to our partnership. The practical aspects of planning to leave Jake felt surreal, while maintaining normal domestic routines and conversations about our future together. I continued participating in discussions about weekend plans and social commitments, while secretly researching apartment listings and calculating the financial implications of ending our cohabitation. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting, but I needed time to organize my exit strategy before confronting Jake about his betrayal. Tuesday evening brought another late arrival home with vague explanations about client meetings. Jake seemed particularly cheerful and affectionate, bringing takeout from my favorite restaurant and suggesting we plan a weekend trip to explore some of the state parks outside Austin. His enthusiasm for spending time together felt like overcompensation for guilt about his relationship with Melissa. "I've been thinking we should make more effort to have adventures together," he said while we ate dinner on our back patio. "Work has been consuming so much of my energy lately, and I don't want us to fall into the trap of taking each other for granted." The irony of his concern about taking me for granted was almost laughable given what I knew about his secret relationship. "That sounds nice," I said, maintaining the facade of ignorance about his double life. "Any particular parks you had in mind?" "Maybe something near San Antonio," Jake said, and my stomach clenched with the obvious connection to Melissa's location. "I've heard great things about the Natural Bridge Caverns, and there are some beautiful hiking trails in that area." His suggestion confirmed my suspicions that he was looking for opportunities to combine spending time with me and potential meetings with Melissa. The weekend trip would provide cover for seeing her while maintaining the appearance of investment in our relationship. The level of strategic thinking required for such manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. "Let me check my work calendar," I said, buying time while I processed this new evidence of his planning. "This month might be complicated with some client deadlines, but maybe we can find a weekend that works." Jake's face showed brief disappointment that I hadn't immediately agreed to the San Antonio trip, but he quickly recovered with understanding about work obligations. "No rush," he said. "Just something to think about when your schedule opens up." That night, Jake whispered Melissa's name again, but this time, he also murmured what sounded like San Antonio and soon. His sleep-talking was providing real-time insights into his planning and intentions, confirming that he was actively working to arrange opportunities to see Melissa in person. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected development that accelerated my timeline for addressing Jake's betrayal. Amy called during my commute to work with news that would force me to make immediate decisions about how to handle what I'd discovered about Jake's relationship with Melissa. "I need to tell you something that might be difficult to hear," Amy said, without her usual friendly preamble. "I was at a networking event last night for Austin mental health professionals, and I overheard a conversation that involved someone you might know." My heart began racing as I anticipated what Amy might have learned. "What kind of conversation?" "There was a woman talking to a colleague about her complicated relationship with a financial advisor who has a live-in girlfriend," Amy said carefully. "She mentioned his name was Jake, that he worked downtown, and that she was struggling with feelings for someone who was technically unavailable but had indicated that his current relationship might not be permanent." The confirmation that Melissa was discussing her relationship with Jake in professional social settings made the situation feel more urgent and public than I'd realized. "Did she mention anything specific about his current relationship or their future plans?" She said he'd told her that he was questioning his long-term compatibility with his girlfriend, and that he was planning to make some major life changes in the next few months, Amy said. She seemed to believe that he was going to end his current relationship to pursue something with her. This information revealed that Jake had been even more explicit with Melissa about his intentions than his emails had suggested. He'd apparently promised her that he would leave me, giving her reason to believe that their relationship would transition from secret emotional affair to legitimate partnership. The level of commitment he'd apparently made to Melissa while continuing to discuss engagement plans with me demonstrated a capacity for deception that was truly staggering. "Rachel," Amy continued, "I know this is an impossible situation, but you need to know that this woman seemed very confident about Jake's plans to change his relationship status. She talked like someone who believed she was going to be in a relationship with him very soon. The revelation that Melissa expected Jake to leave me created a timeline that would force immediate decisions about how to address his betrayal. If Jake was planning to end our relationship anyway, I needed to protect myself by taking control of the situation, rather than allowing him to manage the process according to his preferred timeline and narrative. I spent Wednesday afternoon developing a comprehensive plan for confronting Jake about his emotional affair and ending our relationship on my terms rather than his. The man who had been deceiving me for 8 months while planning to leave me for another woman was not going to be allowed to control how our partnership ended, or what story people heard about why we broke up. My strategy needed to accomplish several goals simultaneously. I needed to expose Jake's deception to ensure he faced social and professional consequences for his betrayal. I needed to protect my financial interests and ensure fair division of our shared assets. I needed to control the narrative about why our relationship ended to prevent Jake from portraying me as someone he'd outgrown, or who hadn't met his emotional needs. And I needed to ensure that Melissa understood the full scope of Jake's dishonesty, including his willingness to deceive both of us simultaneously. The perfect opportunity to execute my plan was approaching in just 4 days. Jake's company was hosting their annual charity gala at the Driscoll Hotel, one of Austin's most prestigious venues. The event brought together financial advisors, their clients, and other business professionals for an evening of networking and fundraising for local nonprofits. Jake had been looking forward to the event for months, viewing it as an important opportunity to showcase his professional success and community involvement. The charity gala would provide the ideal setting for exposing Jake's deception because it would include his colleagues, clients, and professional network. The people who knew him as trustworthy and ethical would be forced to confront evidence of his capacity for elaborate deception. The clients who relied on his financial advice would learn about his willingness to maintain sophisticated lies about fundamental aspects of his life. Most importantly, the public nature of the venue would prevent Jake from controlling the conversation or manipulating the narrative about what had happened in our relationship. With dozens of witnesses present, he wouldn't be able to deny his betrayal or claim that I was exaggerating or misrepresenting his behavior. I began preparing for the gala confrontation by organizing all the evidence I'd gathered about Jake's relationship with Melissa. The screenshots of their email correspondence, documentation of their meeting times and locations, records of phone calls and text messages, and details about his deceptive explanations to me about his schedule and activities. I created a comprehensive file that would allow me to present concrete proof of his betrayal, rather than making accusations that could be dismissed as paranoid suspicions. I also researched Melissa Chen's likely attendance at the gala. Given her work in Austin's tech industry and her professional relationship with Jake, she would probably be invited as either his guest or as someone connected to the financial services networking that the event facilitated. If Melissa attended, my confrontation would force both of them to face the consequences of their deception simultaneously. The planning process required careful attention to timing and presentation. I needed to expose Jake's betrayal in a way that was dramatic enough to prevent him from minimizing or controlling the narrative, but professional enough to maintain my own credibility and dignity. The goal was to ensure that everyone present understood the scope of his deception, while positioning myself as someone who had discovered wrongdoing rather than someone who is bitter or vindictive about a failed relationship. Thursday and Friday passed in a surreal blend of normal domestic routine and secret preparation for destroying Jake's reputation and ending our relationship. He continued to be affectionate and attentive, discussing final details for the gala and expressing excitement about the evening. His enthusiasm for an event where he would be publicly exposed for his betrayal felt like poetic justice. "I think this gala is going to be really special," Jake said Friday evening while we selected our outfits for the following night. "The charity we're supporting does incredible work with financial literacy in underserved communities, and I'm hoping to attract some new clients who are interested in socially responsible investing." The irony of Jake's concern about social responsibility while maintaining an elaborate deception was not lost on me. "It should be a memorable evening," I agreed, knowing that it would be memorable for reasons he couldn't anticipate. "I'm so glad you'll be there with me," Jake continued, adjusting his tie and checking his appearance in our bedroom mirror. "Having you there makes these professional events so much more enjoyable. You're amazing at networking and making connections that help both of our careers." His gratitude for my support felt like a final insult given what I planned to reveal about his character the following evening. The man who had been using my trust and affection to enable his emotional affair was about to discover that betraying someone's partnership has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate relationship. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather for an evening that would change everything about our lives. Jake was cheerful and excited as we prepared for the day, completely unaware that his carefully constructed double life was about to be exposed to everyone who mattered in his professional and social world. As I got dressed for the charity gala, selecting an outfit that would project confidence and dignity during the most important confrontation of my life, I felt a strange sense of peace about what I was planning to do. Jake had chosen to betray our partnership through months of deception and emotional infidelity. He had decided to pursue another woman while maintaining the security and convenience of our relationship. He had planned to leave me on his timeline according to his preferred narrative, but I had discovered his betrayal, documented his deception, and planned a confrontation that would ensure he faced appropriate consequences for his choices. The man who had underestimated my intelligence and determination was about to learn that some betrayals demand public accountability. The charity gala at the Driscoll Hotel was about to become the stage for Jake Thompson's public reckoning, and I was ready to ensure that everyone who thought they knew his character would learn exactly what kind of man he really was. The Driscoll Hotel's crystal ballroom looked absolutely stunning as Jake and I arrived for the charity gala. The historic venue's ornate chandeliers cast warm light over elegantly dressed professionals mingling with cocktails, creating the perfect backdrop for Austin's financial elite to network while supporting local nonprofits. Jake beamed with pride as we entered, his hand on my lower back as he guided me through the crowd of colleagues and clients who had come to celebrate community involvement and professional success. I felt remarkably calm considering what I was planning to do in just a few hours. My black cocktail dress was perfectly chosen for the occasion, professional enough to maintain credibility during serious accusations but elegant enough to command attention when the moment came. I carried a small clutch that contained my phone with all the documented evidence of Jake's betrayal, screenshots organized and ready to share with anyone who questioned the truth of what I was about to reveal. Jake introduced me to colleagues and clients with obvious affection and pride, completely unaware that he was leading me around a room full of people who would soon know exactly what kind of man he really was. His confidence was extraordinary given the scope of his deception. He truly believed he had managed his double life so skillfully that no one, including me, suspected anything inappropriate about his relationship with Melissa Chen. "Rachel has been incredible support for my business growth this year," Jake told a group of his colleagues near the bar. "Her marketing expertise has helped me understand how to connect with younger clients, and her strategic thinking has been invaluable for planning my expansion into the tech industry." The irony of his praise for my strategic thinking was delicious. If only he knew how thoroughly I'd analyzed his behavior and planned his downfall. "Jake's always been great at recognizing talent and building partnerships," I replied with a smile that felt genuine despite its duplicitous intent. As we moved through the cocktail hour, I scanned the crowd for any sign of Melissa Chen. Given her work in Austin's tech industry and her professional relationship with Jake, there was a strong possibility she would attend either as his guest or through her own business connections. The thought of confronting both of them simultaneously felt like perfect justice for the months of deception they'd maintained. By 7:30, the crowd began moving toward their assigned tables for dinner and the evening's program. Jake and I were seated at table 12, with several of his longest-standing clients and their spouses. The conversation was pleasant and professional, focusing on recent market developments and the nonprofit organization we were supporting through the evening's fundraising efforts. I participated in the dinner conversation with genuine engagement while monitoring Jake's behavior for any signs that he knew Melissa was present or that he was planning to see her during the evening. He seemed completely relaxed and focused on the business networking opportunities the event provided. If Melissa was in attendance, he was either being extremely discreet about acknowledging her presence, or he hadn't yet noticed her in the crowd. The dinner program included remarks from the nonprofit's director about their financial literacy programs and the impact of previous fundraising efforts. Jake listened attentively and applauded enthusiastically, playing the role of community-minded businessman to perfection. The man sitting beside me appeared to be exactly the kind of ethical, generous professional that his colleagues and clients believed him to be. During the nonprofit director's presentation, I noticed a familiar figure seated at a table near the front of the ballroom. Melissa Chen was indeed in attendance, looking stunning in a deep blue dress that complemented her professional demeanor. She was seated with what appeared to be colleagues from her tech company, participating in the evening as a legitimate attendee, rather than as Jake's secret guest. The confirmation of Melissa's presence made my confrontation plan feel even more appropriate. Both parties to Jake's emotional affair were in the same room, surrounded by the professional community that respected and trusted Jake's character. The stage was perfectly set for revealing the truth about his capacity for deception and manipulation. I excused myself to visit the restroom, using the opportunity to walk closer to Melissa's table and confirm her identity. She was even more beautiful in person than her professional photos had suggested, with an animated speaking style and confident presence that made her attraction obvious. I could understand why Jake had been drawn to her energy and passion, but understanding his temptation didn't excuse the elaborate deception he'd maintained while pursuing her. As I passed near her table, I overheard fragments of conversation that confirmed my suspicions about her expectations regarding Jake. She was telling a colleague about major life changes she was anticipating in the coming months, speaking with the excitement of someone who believed her romantic situation was about to improve significantly. "Sometimes timing is everything in relationships," she said to the woman beside her. "When you meet the right person but the circumstances are complicated, you have to be patient and trust that things will work out when they're supposed to." Her confidence about Jake's intentions toward her made my planned confrontation feel even more necessary. Melissa clearly believed that Jake was planning to leave me for her, and she deserved to understand the full scope of his dishonesty before making any major life decisions based on his promises. I returned to our table as the nonprofit presentation concluded, and the evening moved into its networking and dancing phase. Jake immediately stood and extended his hand, inviting me to dance to the live jazz trio that had begun playing. We moved onto the dance floor with several other couples, swaying to romantic music while I prepared to destroy his reputation and our relationship. "This has been such a perfect evening," Jake murmured as we danced, his arms around my waist and his face close to mine. "Thank you for being here with me. These professional events mean so much more when I can share them with someone I love." His words about love felt like the cruelest irony given what I knew about his feelings for Melissa and his plans to leave me for her. "It certainly has been memorable," I replied, knowing that he had no idea how memorable the evening was about to become. As our dance ended, Jake suggested we visit the silent auction tables to bid on items supporting the nonprofit's programs. We spent several minutes examining donated experiences and artwork, with Jake making generous bids that would enhance his reputation for community involvement. His performance as a caring, generous community member was flawless, making his eventual exposure even more devastating. The evening's formal program resumed with remarks from several community leaders about the importance of financial literacy and the impact of responsible business practices on social equity. Jake listened with apparent interest and concern, nodding thoughtfully at presentations about economic justice and ethical business leadership. As the final speaker concluded their remarks, the event coordinator announced that there would be an opportunity for brief comments from any attendees who wanted to share thoughts about the evening's theme or the nonprofit's mission. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the perfect opportunity to address a crowd of Jake's colleagues and clients about the importance of honesty and accountability in both professional and personal relationships. I stood up from our table and approached the microphone, my heart pounding but my mind crystal clear about what I needed to say. The ballroom quieted as people noticed someone moving toward the speaking platform, assuming another community leader was about to share thoughts about the nonprofit's work. "Good evening," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system. "My name is Rachel Martinez, and I work in marketing here in Austin. I wanted to share some thoughts about tonight's theme of financial responsibility and ethical business practices." Jake's face showed mild surprise and pride that I was participating in the evening's program, but he had no reason to suspect that my comments would be anything other than supportive of the event's mission and his professional reputation. "This evening, we've heard beautiful presentations about the importance of trust in financial relationships," I continued, scanning the crowd and noting Melissa's attention from her table near the front. "Clients need to be able to trust their financial advisors with their most important resources and their most personal information. That trust is the foundation of ethical business practice." I could see Jake nodding along with my comments, probably assuming I was building toward praise for his professional integrity and community involvement. Several people in the audience were also nodding, appreciating what they assumed would be remarks supporting the evening's message about responsible business leadership. "But trust isn't just important in professional relationships," I said, shifting toward the personal revelations that would change everything. "It's also essential in personal partnerships. When someone violates trust in their personal life, it raises serious questions about their character and their ability to maintain ethical standards in their professional relationships." Jake's expression began to shift as he realized my comments were taking an unexpected direction. The confidence and pride on his face were replaced by confusion and growing concern about where my remarks were heading. "For the past 8 months," I continued, my voice remaining steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal, "I've been in a committed relationship with Jake Thompson, who many of you know as a respected financial advisor here in Austin. We've been living together, planning our engagement, and building what I believed was a partnership based on honesty and mutual respect." The room's attention intensified as people realized this was not a typical comment about the nonprofit's mission. Jake's face had gone pale, and I could see him starting to understand that his carefully maintained deception was about to be exposed publicly. "3 weeks ago, I discovered that Jake has been maintaining an elaborate emotional affair with one of his clients," I announced, watching as murmurs of shock and disbelief rippled through the crowd. "For 8 months, while living with me and discussing our future together, he has been developing an intimate relationship with another woman, someone he met through his professional work." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Conversations stopped throughout the ballroom as people processed what they were hearing. Jake stood up from our table, his face a mask of panic and desperation as he realized the scope of what I was revealing about his character. "Rachel, stop," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "This isn't the place for personal issues. We can discuss this privately." His attempt to minimize my revelation only confirmed the truth of my accusations to everyone watching. "Actually, Jake, this is exactly the place to discuss issues of trust and ethical behavior," I replied into the microphone, "especially when those issues involve professional relationships that have crossed appropriate boundaries." I pulled out my phone and displayed one of the email screenshots I'd prepared as evidence. I have extensive documentation of Jake's inappropriate relationship with his client, including romantic emails and evidence of secret meetings that he's been hiding from me for months. The crowd's reaction intensified as people realized I was presenting concrete evidence rather than making emotional accusations. Phones began appearing as people started recording what was clearly going to become a significant scandal in Austin's professional community. "The woman Jake has been pursuing is Melissa Chen, who works in Austin's tech industry," I continued, watching as Melissa's face showed shock and horror from her table near the front. "She's actually here tonight, and I believe she deserves to know the full truth about Jake's deception." Melissa stood up from her table, her face showing a combination of embarrassment and anger as she realized she was being publicly identified as part of Jake's betrayal. The attention of the entire ballroom focused on her as people tried to understand the connections between the three of us. "Jake told Melissa that we were separated and planning to divorce," I announced, addressing her directly while ensuring everyone could hear the full scope of his deception. "He convinced her that our relationship was over and that he was free to pursue a new partnership with her. None of that was true." The gasps and murmurs from the crowd confirmed that people were understanding the elaborate nature of Jake's lies. He had deceived not just me, but also Melissa, while maintaining his professional reputation and community standing through sophisticated manipulation. Until 3 weeks ago, Jake and I were planning our engagement, I continued, ensuring that everyone understood the timeline of his betrayal. We were looking at rings, discussing wedding plans, and building a life together. At the same time, he was telling another woman that he was leaving me for her. Jake made another attempt to stop my revelation, approaching the microphone platform with obvious desperation. Rachel, please, you're misunderstanding the situation. This isn't what it looks like. His denial only strengthened my credibility with the audience, who could see his panic and guilt written clearly across his face. What it looks like, Jake, is exactly what it is, I replied firmly. 8 months of documented deception, emotional infidelity, and manipulation of 2 women simultaneously. I turned back to address the crowd directly, wanting to ensure my message about character and consequences was clear. I'm sharing this because everyone in this room trusts Jake Thompson with their financial futures. You believe he's honest, ethical, and trustworthy. But a man who can maintain such elaborate deceptions in his personal life raises serious questions about his character in all aspects of his relationships. The implications for Jake's professional reputation were becoming clear to everyone present. Financial advisors succeed based on client trust, and evidence of such sophisticated personal deception would inevitably impact how people viewed his professional integrity. Melissa approached the front of the room, her face showing anger and betrayal as she realized the full scope of how Jake had manipulated both of us. Is this true? She demanded, addressing Jake directly. Have you been lying to me about your relationship status? Jake's response was stammering and defensive, confirming his guilt to everyone watching. Melissa, I can explain everything. The situation is complicated, and I was trying to handle it carefully. There's nothing complicated about honesty, Melissa replied, her voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system. Either you're in a committed relationship or you're not. Either you're available to pursue something with me or you're not. Her public confrontation of Jake provided additional confirmation of the truth of my accusations and demonstrated that he had indeed been deceiving both of us about his intentions and availability. I returned to the microphone for my final comments, wanting to ensure that the consequences of Jake's behavior were clear to everyone present. I'm ending my relationship with Jake tonight because I can't trust someone who's capable of such elaborate deception, I announced. But I think everyone who does business with him deserves to know about his character and his willingness to maintain sophisticated lies when it serves his interests. The crowd's reaction was a mixture of shock, sympathy for my situation, and obvious concern about the implications for their own relationships with Jake. The man they had trusted with their financial planning and personal information had been exposed as someone capable of extraordinary deception and manipulation. As I stepped away from the microphone, Jake made one final desperate attempt to control the narrative. This is a private matter between Rachel and me, he called out to the crowd. It doesn't have anything to do with my professional relationships or business practices. His attempt to separate his personal and professional character only highlighted the problem with his behavior. The audience could see that someone capable of such personal deception couldn't be trusted to maintain ethical standards in any aspect of their life. Melissa approached me as I gathered my belongings, her face showing a mixture of gratitude and anger. Thank you for telling me the truth, she said quietly. I had no idea he was lying about everything. I would never have gotten involved with someone who was in a committed relationship. Her confirmation that Jake had indeed deceived her about our relationship status provided final validation of my accusations and demonstrated that his manipulation had victimized both of us. As Jake stood in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by colleagues and clients who now questioned everything they thought they knew about his character, I felt a profound sense of justice and closure. The man who had betrayed my trust while planning to leave me for another woman had been exposed publicly for exactly what he was: someone whose personal behavior revealed fundamental character flaws that extended far beyond romantic relationships. The charity gala that was supposed to showcase Jake's community involvement and professional success had instead become the stage for his public reckoning. Everyone who mattered in his professional and social world now knew the truth about his capacity for deception and manipulation. As I walked out of the Driscoll Hotel, leaving Jake to face the consequences of his choices alone, I felt genuinely proud of how I'd handled the situation. I had gathered evidence, documented the truth, and presented my case with dignity and credibility. The man who had underestimated my intelligence and determination had learned that some betrayals demand public accountability. Jake Thompson's reputation in Austin's financial community would never recover from the revelation that he'd maintained such elaborate personal deceptions, while positioning himself as someone who could be trusted with other people's most important financial decisions. The consequences he would face were entirely proportional to the betrayal he had committed. Most importantly, both Melissa and I now knew the truth about Jake's character, and we could make informed decisions about our futures without being manipulated by his lies and false promises. The justice of the evening felt complete and satisfying in ways that private confrontation never could have achieved. The morning after the charity gala, I woke up in my old South Austin apartment for the first time in 18 months. The space felt smaller than I remembered, but also peaceful in ways that Jake's house had stopped feeling once I'd discovered his betrayal. I had moved my essential belongings the night before, leaving behind the shared life we'd built and the future we'd planned together. The relief of no longer having to pretend I didn't know about his deception was enormous. My phone had been buzzing constantly since the previous evening, with messages from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who had witnessed the gala confrontation or seen videos of it circulating on social media. The story of Jake Thompson's public exposure had spread rapidly through Austin's professional community, with people sharing recordings and discussing the implications for anyone who did business with him. Amy Rodriguez was the first person I called that morning, needing to process what had happened with someone who understood the full context of my discovery and decision to confront Jake publicly. She answered immediately, her voice full of concern and support. "Rachel, I've been thinking about you all night," Amy said. "I saw the videos that people are sharing, and I'm so proud of how you handled that situation. It took incredible courage to expose his deception like that." "It felt necessary," I replied, making coffee in my small kitchen and appreciating the simple pleasure of making decisions about my morning routine, without considering anyone else's preferences. Jake had been manipulating both Melissa and me for months, and he was planning to control the narrative about ending our relationship. I couldn't let him manage the story when so many people trusted him professionally. "The response on social media has been incredible," Amy continued. "People are calling you brave for speaking up about emotional abuse and financial manipulation. A lot of women are sharing their own stories about partners who used their trustworthiness against them." The thought that my confrontation might help other people recognize and address similar betrayals made the public nature of my revelation feel even more worthwhile. Jake's deception wasn't unique, and his methods of manipulation were probably being used by countless other people who relied on their partner's trust to enable inappropriate relationships. Over the next few days, the full scope of consequences for Jake's professional reputation became clear. His business phone was reportedly ringing constantly, with existing clients demanding explanations about his character, and potential new clients canceling consultation appointments. Several of his professional partnerships were being reconsidered as companies questioned whether they wanted to be associated with someone who had demonstrated such profound dishonesty. The Austin Business Journal published an article about the incident that focused on the broader implications of personal character for professional trust relationships. Financial advisors interviewed for the piece emphasized that their success depended entirely on client confidence in their integrity, and that evidence of elaborate personal deception inevitably raised questions about professional honesty. Jake's social media accounts went silent immediately after the gala, but I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was dealing with significant damage to both his personal and professional relationships. His family was reportedly shocked by the revelation of his emotional affair and the sophisticated deception he'd maintained while planning our engagement. Tyler Thompson, Jake's younger brother, reached out to me directly 3 days after the gala with a message that provided insight into the family's reaction to learning about Jake's character. "Rachel, I don't even know how to begin apologizing for my brother's behavior," Tyler wrote in a lengthy text message. "My parents and I had no idea that Jake was capable of the kind of deception you exposed at the gala. We always believed he was honest and trustworthy, and were horrified to learn how thoroughly he betrayed your trust." Tyler's message continued with information about the family's response to Jake's behavior. "My parents are furious with Jake, not just because of how he treated you, but because of how his dishonesty reflects on our family's values. They raised us to believe that honesty and integrity were non-negotiable, and they feel like Jake's behavior has violated everything they tried to teach us. The family's rejection of Jake's behavior provided additional validation that my decision to expose his deception publicly had been appropriate. People who had known him for his entire life were questioning his character once they understood the scope of his manipulation and dishonesty. Most surprisingly, Tyler included an offer that demonstrated the family's commitment to making amends for Jake's behavior. I know this doesn't fix anything Jake did to you, but my parents want you to know that you'll always be welcome in our family, regardless of what happens with Jake. They consider you their daughter, and they don't want his bad choices to end their relationship with you. The Thompson family's loyalty meant more to me than any romantic relationship could have. They had chosen to maintain their connection with me rather than defending Jake's indefensible behavior, demonstrating the kind of character and integrity that Jake had apparently never truly possessed. Melissa Chen contacted me directly 4 days after the gala, requesting a private conversation about Jake's deception and our shared experience of being manipulated by someone we had trusted. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Austin, both of us still processing the revelation that we had been unknowing participants in Jake's elaborate emotional affair. "I keep thinking about all the signs I should have noticed," Melissa said as we settled into a quiet corner with our drinks. Jake was always vague about his living situation, and he never invited me to his house or introduced me to his friends. He claimed it was because he wanted to keep his personal and professional lives separate, but now I realize he was just hiding the fact that he lived with you. Her description of Jake's behavior with her revealed the sophisticated planning that had gone into maintaining his deception. He had created entirely different versions of his life for each of us, carefully managing information to prevent either of us from discovering the other's existence. "The worst part is realizing how carefully he manipulated both of our emotions," I said, sharing some of the timeline details I had discovered through his emails. "He was telling you that he was leaving me while simultaneously planning our engagement. The level of calculation required for that kind of deception is frightening." Melissa nodded, her expression showing the same combination of anger and disbelief that I had been experiencing. I trusted him completely because of his professional reputation and the way other people talked about his character. Financial advisors are supposed to be trustworthy, and he used that professional credibility to make me believe he was someone I could rely on emotionally. Our conversation revealed that Jake had used similar manipulation tactics with both of us, exploiting our individual character traits and vulnerabilities to maintain control over our relationships with him. He had identified what each of us needed emotionally and professionally, then positioned himself as someone who could meet those needs while secretly pursuing his own agenda. "I'm actually grateful that you exposed him publicly," Melissa continued. "If you had confronted him privately, he probably would have found ways to continue manipulating both of us while managing the situation to his advantage. The public revelation made it impossible for him to control the narrative or minimize the consequences of his behavior." Her perspective helped me feel even more confident about my decision to address Jake's betrayal at the charity gala. The public nature of the confrontation had prevented him from using his manipulative skills to avoid accountability or continue deceiving people about his character. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Melissa made an observation that perfectly captured the broader implications of Jake's behavior. "The scary thing is that if he could maintain such elaborate deceptions while appearing completely honest and trustworthy, how many other people are doing similar things? How do you ever trust someone completely when you know that even the most seemingly reliable people can be living double lives?" Her question highlighted one of the most disturbing aspects of discovering Jake's betrayal. The experience had shaken my confidence in my ability to accurately assess people's character and intentions, making me question whether I would ever be able to trust future partners completely. However, I was also beginning to recognize that Jake's deception was not a reflection of my poor judgment, but rather evidence of his sophisticated manipulation skills. He had deliberately exploited normal relationship trust and used my own positive character traits against me. The problem was not my willingness to trust, but his willingness to abuse that trust for his own benefit. The week following the gala brought unexpected professional opportunities that helped me focus on rebuilding my life rather than dwelling on Jake's betrayal. Several Austin business owners who had witnessed my confrontation reached out to discuss potential marketing collaborations, impressed by my strategic thinking and professional presentation, even in such a personal crisis. Sterling Creative Agency, where I worked as a marketing manager, received multiple inquiries from potential clients who specifically requested to work with me after seeing how I had handled the situation with Jake. My ability to document evidence, present facts clearly, and maintain professional credibility while addressing personal betrayal had apparently demonstrated skills that business owners valued for their own marketing challenges. What you did at that gala was essentially a masterclass in crisis communication and reputation management, my supervisor David Kim told me during our weekly team meeting. You controlled the narrative, presented evidence effectively, and maintained your credibility while completely destroying someone else's reputation. Those are exactly the skills our clients need when they're dealing with competitive challenges or public relations problems. The recognition that my confrontation of Jake had actually enhanced my professional reputation felt like unexpected justice. The skills I had used to expose his betrayal were the same strategic thinking and communication abilities that made me effective in marketing. And potential clients were recognizing the value of working with someone who could handle complex situations with such competence. Within 2 weeks of the charity gala, I had received 3 offers for freelance marketing projects and 1 inquiry about joining a startup as their head of marketing. The professional opportunities emerging from my personal crisis were providing concrete evidence that standing up for myself and demanding accountability had been the right decision both personally and professionally. The startup opportunity was particularly intriguing because it came from a company that specialized in financial technology ethics, developing software to help financial advisors maintain appropriate boundaries and transparency with their clients. The founder had seen the gala videos and was impressed by my understanding of trust dynamics and professional responsibility. We need someone who understands both the marketing challenges of the financial services industry and the importance of ethical behavior in client relationships, the founder Sarah Williams explained during our initial conversation. Your experience with Jake's deception gives you unique insights into how trust is built and destroyed in financial relationships. The possibility of turning my painful experience with Jake into professional expertise that could help prevent similar situations for other people felt like the perfect form of long-term justice. Instead of simply moving on from his betrayal, I could use what I had learned to help create systems that would make such deception more difficult and easier to detect. 3 weeks after the charity gala, I made the decision to accept the startup position and leave Sterling Creative Agency to pursue this new opportunity. The role would allow me to combine my marketing expertise with my understanding of relationship dynamics and professional ethics, creating educational content and communication strategies for financial advisors who wanted to maintain appropriate boundaries with their clients. My first project involved developing a training program for financial advisors about recognizing and preventing inappropriate personal relationships with clients. The irony of using Jake's behavior as a case study for professional education was satisfying in ways I hadn't anticipated. Emotional affairs often begin with financial advisors who justify increased personal communication as necessary for building client trust, I wrote in the training materials. However, when professional relationships begin to include regular personal conversations, secret meetings, and emotional intimacy that the advisor feels the need to hide from their personal partners, clear boundaries have been violated. The training program included specific warning signs that colleagues and compliance officers should watch for, communication strategies for maintaining appropriate professional distance, and protocols for addressing situations where personal feelings were developing inappropriately. Each element was informed by my experience with Jake's deception and designed to prevent other people from experiencing similar betrayals. The response to the training program from financial services companies was overwhelmingly positive, with multiple firms requesting customized versions for their specific employee populations. The demand for this type of education revealed that Jake's behavior was not unique, and that the industry recognized the need for better systems to prevent and address inappropriate client relationships. 6 months after the charity gala, I received an unexpected message that provided closure to one of the most painful aspects of Jake's betrayal. Melissa Chen reached out to let me know that she had been contacted by 2 other women who had experienced similar manipulation from Jake, both before and during our relationship. It turns out Jake has a pattern of pursuing multiple women simultaneously while lying to each of them about his availability and intentions, Melissa wrote. The other women saw the gala videos and recognized his behavior from their own experiences with him. We're considering whether to pursue any kind of formal complaint about his professional conduct. The revelation that Jake had been engaging in similar deception with multiple people over an extended period confirmed that his betrayal of me was not an isolated incident or a momentary lapse in judgment. He was someone who systematically used his professional credibility and personal charm to manipulate women for his own emotional and physical gratification. This information also validated my decision to expose him publicly, rather than handling his betrayal privately. If Jake had been allowed to manage the situation discreetly, he probably would have continued using the same manipulation tactics with other victims. The public nature of his exposure had apparently encouraged other women to recognize and report his patterns of deception. The formal complaint that Melissa and the other women eventually filed with the State Financial Advisory Board included documentation of Jake's inappropriate client relationships and evidence that he had used his professional position to pursue personal relationships under false pretenses. The investigation that followed resulted in disciplinary action against his professional license and requirements for additional ethics training before he could continue practicing. The professional consequences for Jake's behavior extended far beyond the immediate embarrassment of the charity gala exposure. His demonstrated pattern of deception and manipulation had created lasting damage to his ability to practice financial advisory services, ensuring that his betrayal would have long-term career implications. 1 year after the charity gala, I found myself in a completely different life than I had expected when I was living with Jake and planning our engagement. My work with financial services ethics had evolved into a consulting practice that helped companies across multiple industries develop policies and training programs for maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. The expertise I had gained from experiencing and exposing Jake's manipulation had become the foundation for a career helping organizations prevent similar situations. Instead of being a victim of emotional manipulation, I had become someone who helped other people recognize and address these dynamics before they caused serious damage. My personal life had also evolved in ways that felt healthier and more authentic than my relationship with Jake had ever been. I was dating again, but with much better understanding of warning signs and red flags that I had missed or dismissed in previous relationships. The experience with Jake had taught me to trust my instincts more completely and to demand transparency and honesty from potential partners. The Thompson family had maintained their promise to continue treating me as family, despite ending my relationship with Jake. I attended Tyler's art gallery opening, had dinner with Mark and Linda Thompson on a monthly basis, and remained connected to the people who had genuinely cared about me during my relationship with their son. "You handled that situation with more grace and strength than Jake deserved," Linda Thompson told me during one of our dinners. "We're proud to call you our daughter, and we're grateful that you didn't let Jake's poor choices end your relationship with our family." Their continued support provided ongoing validation that my response to Jake's betrayal had been appropriate, and that the people who truly knew my character respected the way I had demanded accountability for his deception. The charity that had benefited from the gala where I exposed Jake's betrayal invited me to speak at their following year's event about the importance of personal integrity in professional relationships. The opportunity to return to the same venue where I had confronted Jake, but this time as an honored speaker rather than a betrayed partner, felt like perfect symbolic closure to that chapter of my life. Trust is the foundation of all meaningful relationships, whether personal or professional, I told the audience of financial advisors and business leaders. When someone violates that trust through deception and manipulation, the consequences should be proportional to the damage they have caused. Accountability is not about revenge, but about ensuring that people who abuse trust face appropriate consequences for their choices. The standing ovation I received after my speech demonstrated that my message about accountability and consequences resonated with people who understood the importance of integrity in their own professional and personal relationships. As I left the Driskill Hotel that evening, walking past the same entrance where I had arrived with Jake exactly 1 year earlier, I felt profound gratitude for the strength I had found to expose his betrayal and rebuild my life according to my own values and priorities. Jake Thompson had underestimated my intelligence, my determination, and my willingness to demand accountability for betrayal. His assumption that I would quietly accept his deception and allow him to control the narrative about our relationship had been a fundamental miscalculation that cost him his reputation, his career prospects, and his personal relationships. The man who had whispered another woman's name in his sleep while planning our engagement had learned that some betrayals demand public accountability. The woman he had manipulated and deceived had proven that trust, once violated, requires consequences that match the scope of the deception. Most importantly, I had transformed the most painful experience of my life into expertise that was helping other people recognize and prevent similar manipulation. Jake's betrayal had inadvertently launched me into work that felt more meaningful and impactful than anything I had done during our relationship. 2 years later, as I was preparing for my wedding to a man whose honesty and transparency were evident in every aspect of his character, I received a message that provided final closure to the Jake Thompson chapter of my life. He had apparently left Austin entirely, relocating to another state where his reputation for deception and manipulation was not well known. The message came from a mutual acquaintance who had witnessed the charity gala confrontation and had been following the aftermath of Jake's professional and personal downfall. "I thought you'd want to know that Jake's business finally failed completely," the message read. "He's apparently working for someone else's firm now, in a position with much less autonomy and responsibility. His reputation never recovered from what happened at the gala." The information about Jake's continued professional struggles confirmed that public accountability had achieved its intended purpose. The man who had used his professional success and community standing to enable personal deception was now living with the long-term consequences of his choices. However, I found that I felt no satisfaction or vindictive pleasure in learning about Jake's ongoing difficulties. The justice I had sought by exposing his betrayal had been achieved, and his continued struggles were simply the natural result of his character flaws, rather than anything I needed to celebrate or monitor. My focus had shifted completely to building a life based on authentic relationships, meaningful work, and the kind of personal integrity that Jake had never possessed. The experience of discovering and confronting his betrayal had taught me to value honesty and transparency above all other relationship qualities, and to trust my own judgment about people's character and intentions. The morning after receiving the message about Jake's professional failures, I woke up next to my fiancé in the home we had bought together, feeling grateful for the contrast between the relationship I had lost and the partnership I had found. The man sleeping beside me had never given me reason to question his honesty, his commitment, or his character. Our relationship was built on the kind of mutual respect and transparency that I had mistakenly believed I shared with Jake. As I made coffee and prepared for another day of work helping organizations build ethical professional relationships, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since the night I first heard Jake whisper Melissa's name in his sleep. That moment of devastating discovery had led to the most difficult and empowering decision of my life, ultimately resulting in personal and professional growth I never could have imagined. The woman who had been planning an engagement to a manipulative deceiver had become someone who helped other people recognize and prevent similar betrayals. The painful experience of discovering Jake's emotional affair had been transformed into expertise that was making a positive impact on countless other relationships and organizations. Jake Thompson had taught me that some people are capable of extraordinary deception, but he had also inadvertently taught me that I was capable of extraordinary strength when faced with betrayal. The choice to expose his behavior publicly, rather than accepting his manipulation privately, had been the defining moment that transformed me from victim to advocate. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.